So this is just like the first problem on the homework assignment, and it employs those ideas that I showed you when what happens with the central limit theorem. And we always know that if we have a population with an average of 100, okay, it's telling us we've got a population with an average of 100, and we want to find out how the samples, different size samples, will vary around that center. So we know the center of this distribution is 100. Regardless of the sample size, the middle is always 100. And that's what the central limit theorem tells us. And then to find the standard deviation for when the sample size is 64, in other words, we want to know how do all those samples of size 64 fall, how the averages for all those samples. When we have 64 individuals or 64 scores in each sample, and then find the average of them, how do those fall around this middle of 100? Well, we know the standard deviation is, for these sampling distributions, is found by taking the population standard deviation, often we'll use that symbol for it, divided by the square root of the sample size. So in this case, they told us the population standard deviation, this is for A, they told us the population standard deviation is 16, and we're taking samples of size 64. So we're going to do this calculation. That gives us 16 over, let's see, the square root of 64 is 8. 16 divided by 8 is 2. So this has a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 2. Now what happens if we have samples of size 100? Well, we still know that the mean is 100. That doesn't change. We just know it's going to have a much tighter cluster of samples, so we're going to take that population standard deviation and divide it by the square root of 100, because our samples are now 100 big. Okay, so that's going to be 16 over 10, which is 1.6. So notice that the standard deviation is smaller. Bigger sample is going to have less variation than a smaller sample will. That's why that standard deviation was 2. And that's exactly why we're going to state for part C, larger samples have smaller variances or smaller variation around the middle. Go back and watch that video that I made on the main page about sample sizes and how they affect the distribution.